So as I mentioned, this Wednesday, we're beginning a church-wide fast, 7-day church-wide fast. And I just honestly, like full disclosure, I'm feeling all the feelings as it relates to the fast. But part of it is because there is a growing intensity, a growing turbulence happening outside the church. And this is a season that our country is stepping into. I think all of us are feeling that, as I think you should be feeling that. But here's the thing. Anytime the world grows louder, the people of God have got to learn to get quieter internally. Anytime the world feels very complicated, and it feels very complicated right now, you and I, as a people of God, have got to make things more simple. I'm in a tennis league for like old guys, and out of Birmingham, and we were traveling for a little tournament early this summer, and one of the guys on the team, we went to lunch on this trip, and he's like the nicest guy on the planet. He's not a Christian, but he knows I'm a pastor, and so we're just chatting, and he's like, so you're like really into Jesus, and I was like, question mark? I don't know, like, is that I was like, yeah, I'm like super Jesus-y, right? And I'm like, not because I'm a pastor, like I'm a pastor because like I love Jesus, and like he has rescued me, and he pursues me, he helps me make sense of everything in the world. And so yeah, like I'm super into Jesus. And then out of that came this like beautiful, for him, was like this intellectually honest conversation he never had with a pastor about like faith and about Jesus and about the fractured nature of the church and Christians' inconsistency. It was beautiful. And then I was driving home from that, it was several hours, and I was just thinking about that conversation, and it made me think about these conversations I'm having with pastors in our city. This is a conversation happening all over the country, in fact, and the conversation is like, how do we make the church more reasonable? How do we make the church more palatable for people that are outside the church? And I just want you to know, like, I could not be more diametrically opposed to that idea. And the reason is like we're stepping into a time of history, and you may not know this, but we're stepping into a time of history, our history, where you and I have got to be more Jesus-centric, more Jesus-y, more extravagant to the values and the purposes of our Father, more extravagant to living out his calling on our life, not just for his glory, but like for the sake of our neighbors. And so like we want like Jesus to be the center of our life unashamedly. And this is actually one reason we're inviting you into this fast, because some of you, you are already learning to like love Jesus, surrender your life to Jesus in every area. And a fast is just one more way for you to go a little bit deeper, for you to like experience his provision, his faithfulness over you. It's going to be beautiful for you. Others of you, you're going to step into this fast maybe for the first time. And the reason you're doing that is because hopefully today you're going to have maybe an honest conversation with yourself. And honestly, the people we lie to the most are us. So maybe today you're going to have an honest conversation, and you're going to be like, you know what? Jesus is not the center of my life. Like he's like number 13, in terms of priorities. I only go to Jesus like when things like fall apart. And so maybe the Holy Spirit's going to stir up in your heart, and you're going to have a conversation and be like, okay, what would it look like for Jesus to be king for a week? Like, what would it look like for Jesus to get everything? My sexuality, my purity, my money, my time, my ambitions, my ego. Like, what would it look like for Jesus to rule? And for some of you, like, that are going to do that out of an honest conversation with you, it's going to be beautiful for you as well. But what I want to do before we get to actually the fasting conversation, I want to give you sort of 3 primers for this conversation, especially because fasting is new for many of you. So let me give you the primers, just to give you some context. And you can jot these down if it's helpful for you. But the first primer is this, is that the Christian life is not primarily transactional, right? Like you go to Walmart and you're buying bread and milk and cheese and Captain Crunch, and you go to the front, and then you give your money, and then they give you the groceries, right? That's a transaction. That's not the Christian life. The Christian life is not you and I, doing a bunch of things so that Jesus will do a bunch of things for us. Like you and I do not obey our way into God's good graces. Now, if you want to hold on to a transaction, And this is beautiful. Like, there was a transaction that happened 2,000 years ago where Jesus, he goes to a cross that we deserved, and he takes our sin, takes our shame, takes our guilt, takes the wrath of God for us. And when he dies in his body, he is then raised 3 days later, raised to life in his body by the power of the Spirit. And then he gives us forgiveness, gives us his Spirit, gives us his presence, gives us his sonship. We're included in a family. So the transaction is relegated solely to Jesus. He's the one taking and he's the one giving. And our only role in this relationship is recipients. We're receiving like this extravagance from him, this grace from him, and we do that by faith. And so that's the transaction. But I say that because fasting, it's going to feel like, especially because we're all a bunch of like recovering legalists. Fasting can feel like you and I doing a really hard thing to get God's attention. Like, look what I'm doing, God. And so now you're required to move towards me. You're required to do this thing that I'm asking you. And I just want you to know that's not fasting. Fasting is not you and I doing something really spiritual so that God will answer a specific prayer. Now, sometimes that happens. Because we're all praying, we're like, God, would you do this? But like we don't fast primarily for breakthrough. You guys know that? Like breakthrough may happen in your life. Fasting, and again, I've got 30 minutes, so like there's like 12 things that I could talk about today. I'm talking about one thing today. But fasting mostly is about a deeper level of abiding, and that's what we're after. We want a deeper level of abiding with Jesus. And so you know what abiding is? Abiding is as we're with Jesus. And when we humble ourselves through fasting, all of a sudden the scales fall off our eyes and we see what was there the whole time. Good word, John. Right? It's like that. It's when we humble ourselves in fasting, God opens our eyes and we see what was available the entire time that we've been Christians. Like we open our eyes, we're like, oh my gosh, where did this power come from? And he's like, it's been there the whole time. Power to, thank you so much. Power to like overcome a temptation, power to overcome an addiction, power to stay in a difficult marriage, power to obey, power to, I mean like it's there the whole time. And our eyes are open, but it happens through deeper level of abiding. But the problem is we're so distracted by comfort. We're so distracted by like the double cheeseburger meal, the number 7, that we're not humbled. And so Jesus is like, I'm going to give you a mechanism to humble yourself. Second primer is this, and this is primarily to the 18 to 30-year-olds in the room. And this will primarily be the second gathering. So if you're not in that gathering, this may be for you too. But for those in the 18 to 30-year-old age group, you are hardwired, and this is not an indictment against you. This is just like the air that you're breathing. But you are hardwired as an 18 to 30-year-old to just be suspicious of legalism. And you should be. Like, legalism is deadly, okay? But as you're learning, as an 18 to 30-year-old, as you're learning now to own your own faith, where you're like, I'm learning to love Jesus, and I'm learning to surrender everything to Jesus, and I'm learning to love the gospel, what that requires is a different kind of humility where you can say, you know what, I don't know everything. And nobody in the room knows everything, okay? But it's okay for you to make the confession. This is what I'm going to invite you to do. Just to make the confession, I don't know everything. And I may not be able to discern necessarily all the time the difference between legalism and freedom. I may not know the difference between legalism and spiritual grit. Right? Because so what will happen, and I see this often with 18 to 30-year-olds, is that you will throw the baby of the gospel out with the bathwater of legalism. And you're left with nothing. Right? And all that means is like there is a complexity. And there is a layered nature of every relationship in heaven and on earth, right? So like if you want to stay married for 50 years, the way that you stay married for 50 years, this might surprise you, is by living into your promise. You made a promise to somebody, and then they made some promises to you. You made a covenant with God in front of some other people, and you That's how you stay married for 50 years, right? And I tell you that because it's not very different with our relationship with God. It's complex. It's layered, right? Like if you want to know, like I'm going to still be loving Jesus, serving Jesus in 50 years. The way that you can know that is to know somewhere in your spiritual formation there are going to be long seasons where it's not romantic. There are going to be long seasons in your spiritual life where you no longer get the spiritual goosebumps when that song comes on. Am I the only one? There are long seasons where you're like, it's just about abiding. It's just about moving towards Jesus, because I know when I move towards Jesus, he moves toward, like, I'm going to live a life of discipline in the kingdom of God. And what will happen is you'll begin to grow in maturity, and you'll discover that discipline is not the enemy of delight. They're roommates. They're bedfellows in this journey of maturity. You cannot be a mature Christian without pursuing discipline. And listen, you will not have an enduring kind of delight in the Lord without discipline. Okay, third primer is this, and this just goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. When we talk about things like this, and this is why we're fasting more, but we do this because we want to grow up in the Lord. We want to grow up like we all need to grow up. I need to grow up. You need to grow up. Like some of you confessed Jesus 27 years ago, and you're still like a spiritual baby. Like you trusted Jesus with eternity, but you're a child. Like you know, I mean, like, no judgment against seventh graders, okay? But you're acting like a seventh. You know, any seventh graders? I'm sorry, like I love you, but like you're responding like a spiritual seventh grader. Seventh graders, their frontal lobe's not developed, so they have no idea of consequences. They behave short-sightedly. They're only thinking about themselves. And listen, a huge portion of this is you. This is your life. I mean, your life's just about you. It's not about the things of God. It's not about living a life of generosity. It's not about living a life that's of sacrifice and doing hard things for the sake of it. It's just about getting away with things. It's about hiding your sin, boasting in your own righteousness. Listen, we need to grow up. All of us, we need to grow up in the Lord. Like, if there's anything that I want our church to be, like, I want us to be like a bunch of like passionate, extravagant adults in the Lord. Okay, so the question that gets asked to me, and this is the question I'm going to answer today, is why do we fast? And that's an obvious question. Like, I've been asking that question as we're heading out. I'm like, why are we fasting? I hate fasting. I don't like it. It is not something I like. Can't wait for the fast. Why do we fast? And again, there's a lot of answers to that. Let me just give you the one that we're going to focus on today. And this is out of my favorite chapter in the Bible, so this is easy. But 2 Corinthians 4, listen to what Paul says. This is not about fasting, but it applies to fasting. He says, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, which in some measure, when you and I fast, this is what our flesh is going to start. It's going to feel like it's wasting. It's 7 days, though. So, like, you're going to be fine. But our outer self is going to feel like it's wasting away. And our inner self, or our inner life, is renewed day by day. So I love this because Paul's being really plain. Paul's like, we need to be renewed. Like, we're meant to be renewed day by day. Like, hope will wane, encouragement will fade, our buckets leak. So, of course, we need to be renewed day by day. And yeah, we would not need to be renewed day by day if we could drive our car on last year's gas, or if we could live and be sustained on last month's breakfast, or if you and I could feel the relief of yesterday's dosage. But listen, you and I cannot live on yesterday's mercies. This is why the Bible says his mercies are new every morning, because we need his mercy. We need to be renewed day by day. Now, those of you that have a little bit of maturity on you, like where you've been walking with the Lord for a while, you can say with honesty, you can look over your history of spiritual formation, and you can look, there are times, and often it's of no, like, not because of you, where like long seasons where you're like following Jesus was like really easy. There are times where you're like, it's just like breathing. I don't know why it is. It's like, this is amazing. And then there are times, often have nothing to do with you either. It's not because of your sin. It's often maybe the sin of other people, but it's usually just because of being human. There are going to be long seasons then where you're just like in the dirt. And you're like, I don't know why I'm down here. I don't know why I'm like experiencing this level of humility. Like, okay, and there are these two poles that we live in. But what that does is it should cause you and I to ask the question, how do I get more wind underneath my wings? Because I want, like as Isaiah 40 says, like we want to soar on wings like eagles. We want to be more often not living in those places where we're living above the pain and the loss. Not that we're not experiencing it and giving energy to it, but we want to soar like wings like eagles. Like Amy and I, some of you, we moved into a house last year, and immediately we noticed our backyard was filled with birds, like hundreds of birds. And so we bought some nice binoculars, and we're like out there. We're amateur birders. That's for real. And I know some of you are like, get a life, okay? But we love it. We love it. So we're out there and we're like, oh, there's that. Okay, there's that mockingbird. Oh, we got the bluebird. There's bluebirds and blue jays. If you're wondering, there's a difference. And there's the cardinal, and there's the house sparrows that you want to poison and kill. Like those are invasive. So we're like, and then one of the birds that is probably my favorite is we have a hawk that like circles our house, and every once in a while it'll sit on our neighbor's fence and looks over into our yard looking for lunch, right? Looking for a house sparrow to get. But more often we see it about 100 feet up in the air, just circling. And I noticed one time, like it circles for like an hour, and what it found, because I guess it's birds of prey, like they know where this stuff is. It has discovered a jet stream. And there is a jet stream in our neighborhood, like it somehow has intersected our backyard, and it's 100 feet up, and it just circles. It's not having to flap its wings, it just adjusts. And for an hour, it just circles on that jet stream. And in part, this is what fasting is. Fasting is in some unseen way, God putting wind in our wings, where our flesh may fade. And like this is the thing that like is got to die anyway. Our flesh will fade, but our spirit rises. Do you guys understand? Okay, so let's begin this way. Jesus, all that conversation, all this kind of preamble, it makes sense because Jesus' primary teaching in the New Testament, it falls, there's a couple different categories, but his primary category was about the inner life. Almost everything he talked about was about the inner life. And in fact, the most famous text would be the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. And Jesus, in I think it's chapter 5, he talks about what I just call the trifecta of the inner life. And he talks about praying, giving, and fasting, and all within one paragraph. And he's like, all of those have got to be done in secret. He's like, so the moment you start advertising that you're doing that, the moment you get on social media and you're like, I'm fasting, he's like, you've already got your reward. The moment you're like, I'm praying, I spent an hour in prayer, it's like, you've gotten your reward, okay? But what's interesting is when I talk to church people, I'm not going to call them Christians. There's a lot of people come to church that don't follow Jesus, but when I talk to church people, often if you ask them, what does it mean to have a cultivated inner life with Jesus? All of them are going to say, prayer, of course, right? Like Jesus, like prayer. Prayer cultivates the inner life. And then most everybody would also agree with giving, because Jesus tandems that with giving. Interestingly, though, a great number of you don't give. You don't have a life of generosity. You don't have a life of where you care for the poor. You see the value of the immigrant. Like that's not surrendered yet in your life. But ultimately, even if you haven't surrendered your finances to Jesus and furthering the gospel, you would also say, but yes, to live a life that's Jesus-centric, you would say, I'm going to give. Like that's part of the inner life. Interestingly, though, when you talk to almost any Christian in America, almost all of them would say, but not fasting. Fasting is not really part of the inner life. I mean, they fasted way back then because they didn't have good restaurants and they didn't have TV. And, it's like, what else are they going to do, right? It's like, let's fast. That's something fun for them. And so, interestingly though, when Jesus teaches on the inner life, he says, and when you fast. So it's he builds it into this normative activity of the Christian life. So like you and I, as the people of God, regularly, when we fast. And so Acts 13 says this. You see Acts 13 launching the mission movement as well. It says, while they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, this is the people of God, when they were worshiping and fasting, the Holy Spirit spoke to them and said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. The point is this, and I'm just trying to make a case. The point is, anytime in Scripture you see the people of God gathering and they're desperate for God to do something, desperate for God to make a way in the city, desperate to live lives of surrender, you're almost always going to see them praying and fasting together. It's normative. And so it's no wonder that the church in America, like it's weak. We're cowards. And I would contend much of that is because we are people that it's just about comfort. It's about checking a spiritual box. And yet, as the people of God fasted, they were like, God, we want to take the gospel. How do we do that? And he's like, well, you fast. If you fast, I'll fill that place that was filled with cowardice, and I'll fill it with courage. Let me make a couple other cases. In the Old Testament, you see it all over the place. Let me just show you one. 2 Chronicles 20, I love this story. You don't have to turn there, but the Moabites and the Ammonites, they're like about to choke slam Israel, like destroy them. Jehoshaphat, who's the king of Judah, he calls the entire nation. He's like, we're going to fast until God comes through for us. And if he doesn't come through for us, like at least we're ending our lives in surrender. And God comes, and God defeats the Moabites and the Ammonites. Again, Acts chapter 13, I've already mentioned it, but it's just a reminder that when you and I, when we live to this, like it's always going to take us to the place of least resistance. Do you guys understand? Like you and I, our default is never going to be courage. It's never going to be courage. Our default is never going to be inconvenience. It's not. Our default is always going to be, how do I get mine? How do I get more for me? But when we fast and we strip away all of that weird comfort that has inundated our life, all of a sudden we become aware that God's filling us with the kingdom values that move us forward, courage and power and grace. The truth is this, and if you hear anything, this is really the heart of the message. When you and I fast, what we're saying is, God, when I go without food, and by the time you get to like day 3, you're going to be really hungry. And it's always funny because when people are like, well, I don't have to fast food because there are times I go a whole day without eating. I don't just because I forgot. And I'm like, that's not fasting. That's just you being an idiot, right? Like when we fast, we're taking something very valuable to ourselves. And we're saying, God, this is yours. Now fill that with something else more valuable. Your spirit, your comfort, your sustenance. And so when we fast, and this is the thing I want you to hear, by day 3, you're going to be really hungry if you've never fasted before in particular. And day 3, you're going to start getting angry. You're going to be like, I would throat punch my grandmother for a cheeseburger right now. If she was here and she had one, I'd do it. You're dreaming about food. Like you're like, I never think about food like that. You're always thinking about food. And what happens is by day 3, day 4, your prayers begin to change, hopefully. And you're like, God, in the way that my body is longing for food, I want to long for you that way. Yes. But I'm convicted. Like every time I fast, I'm like, God, I never long for you that way. I never long for you like that. I never ache for him the way that my body aches after, day 3. And so what we want to say is, God, in the same way that I'm aching for you, my body's aching for food, I want to ache for you that way. I want to long for you that way. I want everything that you have. Let's go to Isaiah 62 very quickly. This is not a passage about fasting. There are a handful of passages about fasting. This one's not one of them. If you want a beautiful passage on fasting, and maybe I'll teach on this in the fall, in the spring. But it's Isaiah 58. I mean, it's a very clear picture of what fasting looks like. But this gives a picture of what a life looks like when you're fasting. So Isaiah 62, let's read this quickly. It says, "For Zion's sake, I will keep silent. I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet. Till her vindication shines out of the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch. The nations will see your righteousness, and all the kings your glory. You will be called by a new name that the Lord will bestow, and you will be a crown of splendor in the Lord's hand, a royal diadem in the hand of your God. No longer will they call you deserted." Isn't that beautiful? "Your name will not be desolate, but you will be called Heshbah, Heshbah, and your land Beulah. For the Lord will take delight in you, and your land will be married. As a young man marries a young woman, so will your builder marry you. As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you." So that's beautiful in its own right. But look at verse 6. This is so powerful. It says, "I have posted watchmen on your walls, Jerusalem, so they will never be silent day or night. You who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest, and give him, God, no rest, till he establishes Jerusalem and makes her the praise of the earth." So listen, my heart for our house is that we would be a people that do not give God rest. That we're crying out to God day and night. Which, by the way, this is the prayer of Jesus in Luke 18. He says, "Will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night?" And then Isaiah says, "And they will never be silent day or night. You who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest." So the question you and I should be asking is what's in the crawl, up in the crawl of the prophet? Where he's like, not only do I not want to give God rest, because we're just going to be crying out to him day and night. God, would you come? God, would you bring your kingdom? God, would you bring relief? God, would you bring all that you are into my life? In the way that I'm aching, in the way that a crying baby has no respect for a mother, I'm going to cry out to you. But then he's like, then people of God, give yourselves no rest. So he's like, I'm willing to go without sleep to pursue the Lord. Or I'm willing to go without food to pursue the Lord. I'm willing to create real space so that my heart might be tender to what you're doing. Okay, let me finish this way because I want to make this personal for us. Why are we fasting? It would be really easy for us not to fast. I mean, honestly, it's the fall. This is the worst sermon for guests. So if you're I'm visiting churches, this is who we are. Seriously, I just want you to know that if you're looking for a place where you can just fade in the background, just move on. Just move on. And I don't say that in a way that's ugly. But if you're I'm ready to learn in community, to crucify my flesh, to only boast in Jesus, to bring my sins into the light. I'm sick of living a lie. I want to live a life of freedom. And I want Jesus to be everything. This is going to be a place that we're going to try to do that together. So here's my heart for our family today. Why are we fasting? Why am I inviting you into this fast to do something hard? Is we're going to take deadly aim at an idol during these 7 days. Now, to make no mistake, the primary idol in your life is you. Okay, anytime we take Jesus off the throne of our life, usually we go right on the throne, right? I love to say yes to me. You love to say yes to you. But maybe number 2, number 3 in the world, at least in America, would be food. Food is one of our primary idols. And let me just say this. My confession, I love food. I'm not sitting up here I have dominion over food. I love food so much. I dream about food. Amy and I were on vacation in Huntsville a couple weeks ago, and all we did was eat. And it's we're eating this really nice breakfast, and all we're talking about at breakfast is where are we going to eat lunch? Seriously. We're on Yelp, it's going to be delicious. I love food. And here's what's discouraging about this is anytime I'm discouraged about my life, anytime I feel like a failure, and I feel like a failure often, and anytime I'm listening to the voice of the enemy, it's all the voice of the enemy. Anytime I'm doing that, my go-to, my reflex as a human is to be like, how can I make myself feel better for 5 minutes? I know what's going to help. 12 Hershey Kisses. I wish that were a joke. Amy's like, that's a lot. Or 9:30 at night, I'm like, I know it'll make me feel better. You know, I should pursue the Lord. I should open my Bible. Let me cook a pizza at 9:30 at night. That's going to make me feel better. But friends, listen, when we fast, what we're saying is, God, I'm confessing this as sin, as an idolatry, that I have sought to find comfort in a created thing. All the while, the Creator is available. Listen, the Holy Spirit, one of his designations is comforter. And so when we find comfort, I mean, can you imagine, as a married person, if you're like, I'm right here, and we've all done this, by the way, but your husband or wife's like, hey, I'm here to comfort you, and you're like, I'm going to go somewhere else for comfort. Can you imagine the insult to the Creator of the universe, where he's like, I designed comfort. I am the comforter. And we're like, yeah, I know. I'm actually going to go for a counterfeit. I'm going to go for something second. And so doing this is we're taking aim at an idol. And we're saying, no, we're all that you are. And unfortunately, this is not a one and done. John Calvin said, our hearts are idol factories. The moment you kill an idol, you look around and then you come back and you're like, oh, there's another idol. And so this is why we live lives of surrender. This is why we continue to, like Paul says, crucify the flesh every day. Why are we doing this? We're fasting, and this is something we want to live into this year. We're fasting because we need a shot of power. Do you know what will make a distinction from the church from every other good organization? It's the power of God. There are great organizations that feed the poor. There are great organizations that care for the homeless. There are great organizations that can take you on mission trips and go give clean water. You don't have to be a Christian to do that. But do you know what, in the New Testament, what sets the distinction from the church, from the world? It's the power of God to set people free. It's the power of God to break in the impossible situations. I think about, and I love this text. I've taught it so many times, so I'm not going to teach it now, but Matthew 17, Mark 9, it's the same story of Jesus has commissioned the disciples to go out he's like, bring the expression of the kingdom. That's basically what he says. Meaning, I want you to go out, and when people are like, what is the kingdom like? He's like, show them. He's like, so do that by healing the sick, casting out demons, bringing the peace of the kingdom with you wherever you go. And so they're doing that. All sorts of cool stuff's happening. The power of God flows wherever they are. They get to this kid, and they've cast out 1 million demons. They get to this kid, the demon will not come out. They're doing everything they know to do. They're like, I remember we did this one time. Nothing's working. Jesus shows up, and Jesus could see that they're struggling. And Jesus, just like with a word, casts this demon out. The disciples are really embarrassed. The dad was really frustrated, the dad of the kid. And so the disciples privately were like, Jesus, how did you cast that demon out? Like literally the same words that you used to cast that demon out, we used those words. So like what was the difference? And Jesus says, this kind, which should cause a big question for you, like, oh, there are different kinds of demons? Okay, different conversation. But he's like, this kind only comes out by prayer and fasting. So what it should cause you and I to like maybe a revelation is like when you and I fast, when you and I humble ourselves this way, it actually causes a kind of power to rise up in our life that we didn't know was there, we didn't know was available to us unless we got humbled, until we really hold on to Jesus. Jesus, you're the one. You're the one that sets people free. You're the one that brings families back together. You're the one that heals. And so we have to fast to get rid of ourselves. The question you got to ask is this, is how much do you want God? How much do you, like, if you just want just a little bit of God, and you're looking for a good sermon, like, yeah, I mean, like, you can do that on Sundays. Seriously, you can do that. If you just want a little bit of God, like, seriously, you can just, like, come and live some sort of weird, lukewarm Christian life. Every once in a while, you'll get the goosebumps, and you're like, oh, that was such a good service. But you'll live a wasted life. You'll live a life ultimately about you. You'll chase the American dream. You'll come up empty. And so how much do you want God? How much do you want him? I was sitting in worship, and what I was so reminded of is, because I was looking around, and there was so many of you were like just pressing in, and just like, and I know, like, lifting your hand, like, there's all sorts of ways to bring expression to our affection, but what came to my mind was, we're growing in this place where we're a people that just pour out oil to God, like Mary. That we're just like, God, we're going to give you our most valuable thing. We're going to pour out our oil on you. And we're going to get something so much more valuable. And so you just got to ask, like, how much do you want God? Like, when you don't give what's most valuable to you, like, you're just a religious person. You're just a religious, you're the guy sitting at the table, judging the extravagance. And so how much do you want him today? How much do you want him in your marriage? How much do you want him in the middle of your addiction?